Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm quite loud. Thank you so much. So, I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself at the beginning. My name is Sophie Charman-Blower. I'm a member of West London PSC. I'm your sort of compare for this evening. I did mention briefly at the beginning, we don't have a huge amount of time for questions and Q&A this evening, as we do have to be out by 8:30. And there are a couple of kind of announcements and things that I do want to make, but we'll move straight to Andrew now, our speaker, and then we'll have a little bit of time. Thank you. I'm going to have to speak more quietly now, otherwise I'll deafen everyone. So yeah, I'm going to assume you heard most of that. So we're going to move straight to Andrew. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, and then I have a couple of notices and reminders, and obviously the last thing I'll say to you as you leave is please give us some money. We didn't charge for the event today, but there were some costs associated with it. So I hope you all found that interesting. I'm going to pass over to Andrew Feinstein now. Andrew is a former ANC MP. He's an activist, filmmaker, and author of Shadow World, Inside the Global Arms Trade, and the associated film. I think it'd be really interesting to get your view on the film and your thoughts on BDS, obviously coming from South Africa, but also just generally where you think it fits in the wider sort of protest movement, particularly focusing on what we're seeing at the moment in Palestine.
Thanks, and thank you very much everyone for being here. The first thing, this is the second time I've seen the film. And the thing that struck me both the first time I saw it and this time is if you actually look at what motivates these people, it's incredibly self-serving. And I mean, I suppose we could describe it almost as narcissistic in a religious sense. Because as the one legislator admits, the only reason that they support Israel has nothing to do with Jews. It's only insofar as Jews are an instrument for them to get to heaven. When wherever we are, at this moment, we're all going to disappear. And as he says quite explicitly, Jews will be given an opportunity to effectively abandon their own religion and accept Jesus Christ into their lives as he has, so that they can go to heaven. But what is absolutely implicit in that is if Jews actually stick to their religious teachings in the Torah, they're going to burn on the earth as it burns. So it's really lovely to see the fact that you're simply being used as an instrument for the self-involved, mediocre, remarkably unintelligent, corrupt people to get to heaven on their terms. So that's the first thing that really strikes me. And I actually think it's really important, this, because we live in a moment where the world is completely upside down. We live in a moment of total madness. And what indicates that to me more than anything else is that, and you saw bits of it here, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Support for BDS is anti-Semitism. And if we look at this in the United Kingdom, where we have my constituency MP, Keir Starmer, having abused and weaponized anti-Semitism to fight his own reactionary factional battle in the Labour Party and get rid of Jeremy Corbyn so that he could be elevated to the leadership. As the son of a Holocaust survivor, as someone who lectured at Auschwitz where my mom lost dozens of her family, as someone who introduced the first ever motion on the Holocaust in the entire history of the South African Parliament, frankly, I'm deeply, deeply offended by the use of Jewish and other suffering to fight petty political battles. And I think we have to call it out for what it is. And so that, for me, was the very first thing that struck me about this film, is that it just reinforces that message for me. The second thing, of course, and I think the film shows it really well, is the power of boycott, is the power of BDS, is the power of taking action economically. So why on earth would the state of Israel be so obsessed about BDS? Well, I'll tell you why. Israel was the closest ally of apartheid South Africa, who the state of Israel provided with weapons, with military training, and with the technology to become a nuclear power. And they saw that BDS was absolutely central in bringing about an end to apartheid in South Africa. And it did that by seriously negatively impacting the South African economy. So two things very quickly brought about an end to apartheid. One was the way in which tens of millions of ordinary South Africans, predominantly black South Africans, made the country ungovernable through strikes and through making it impossible for the incredibly powerful security services and military to actually rule over black areas of the country. And the second part of that was tens of millions of people around the world boycotting sanctions, boycotting the companies that supported South Africa. So for instance, millions of students either withdrawing their accounts from Barclays Bank or refusing to open accounts with Barclays Bank, until those who ran Barclays Bank at the time realized they were going to lose out on an entire generation of customers that were all going to the competition. So they divested from South Africa. And that action that we can do every day by, as the guy says in the film, deciding which hummus we are going to buy and which we're not, we can all make a difference. Because the only way we are going to get through to this completely psychopathic, genocidal Israeli government, led by that man we saw, Benjamin Netanyahu, who I had the misfortune to meet, and who is probably the most arrogant human being I've ever come into contact with, and also, without a doubt, one of the most racist. And I grew up in apartheid South Africa. The only way we are going to bring sense to people like that is to seriously undermine the Israeli economy. And the only way we're going to do that is by taking action against any company and any politician that supports the state of Israel. So there were huge resonances for me in this film about why Israel is doing what it's doing, the desperation with which it has an entire ministry, that's all it does, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. And what was its strategy, according to one of its ex-deputy ministers? To label anything pro-BDS, anti-Israel, as anti-Semitic.
Thank you, Andrew. I am going to open up for questions and comments. I've just got a couple of things I'd like to say beforehand. One is a plug for our upcoming AGM. So West London Palestine Solidarity Campaign is due to have an AGM at which we're going to be nominating and voting on our new branch committee. So we haven't had one for a couple of years for various reasons, and we're really keen for anyone who is newly engaged or newly re-engaged or has been engaged for some time to come along to that. We're looking to hold it on the 21st of May. More information will be coming out over the next couple of weeks. Please bear in mind that you do have to be a paid up member of PSC to attend that, and being on our mailing list does not necessarily mean you are a paid up member of PSC. So do check, and we can help you look into that if that's something that you're interested in doing. And as I say, more will be coming out about that. I'm going to open the floor up to questions. We're a small group, and I'm sure that I don't need to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Tensions are running very high at the moment. Please be mindful about the way in which you're speaking to each other, and we are not a room full of people who are going to be misogynistic or racist or anti-Semitic or anti-Islamic or anything. So let's just think about the way in which we're talking to each other. And just before I do this, there was another event that some friends are holding, which I thought would be really good to for us to be able to plug.
I'm happy to tell everyone, if you're interested, as an alternative to Eurovision, we're going to be doing Palestine Vision. So it will be in Notting Hill on the 7th of May. If any of you know big names in Palestinian pop, but they'll get it. Yeah, I'm sorry, Andrew, I kind of threw these names at you.
That's fine.
I don't know. If anyone wants more information, I'm happy to provide it. Is that sufficient?
Thank you. Other questions? No,
Oh.
immediately, right there.
Hi, so having just seen you at the German embassy on Friday, do you think the anti-BDS repression in Germany is in fact, as far as I'm concerned, worse than the US and is not getting the sort of attention and resistance, international resistance that it needs?
I think that's an excellent. I think that's an excellent question.
So I'm prosecuted in Germany, by the way, as a British artist. So.
Oh wow. I mean, I think there are two things to say. I think the first is that I think the abuse and weaponization of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom and in Germany aren't getting nearly enough attention. I think the situation here is bad. I think we're starting to see our civil rights and our civil liberties eroded. And I must again admit that I'm terrified because I think that my own constituency MP, Keir Starmer, with the way that he's behaved in the 10 or so years he's been in the constituency, with the way he behaved as head of the Crown Prosecution Service, where he simply refused to prosecute anyone who belonged to any sort of state entity, the police, etc., where he played quite an important role in the fact that Julian Assange is still in jail. And where I think, the way he's run the Labour Party, where he's expelled more Jews in his leadership period than in the entire history of the Labour Party, supposedly in order to combat anti-Semitism, which I really like that. It's a little like if we'd expelled Nelson Mandela from the ANC in order to combat racism. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think the UK is also a problem, but the situation in Germany is particularly extreme at the moment. And for those of you who aren't aware, this past Friday, a British Palestinian doctor, Dr. Ghassan Abu Sita, was due to speak on a panel with me in Berlin. I landed up having to send my input as a video because for various reasons I couldn't actually get to Berlin. Dr. Ghassan traveled and was stopped at the airport where he was interrogated for a number of hours, and then he was deported back to the United Kingdom. Very soon after that, the police, who had been preventing people going in to a conference in solidarity with Palestine, stopped people going in, stormed the building, demanded that the organizers stop live streaming the event, and when they refused, cut off electricity and power in the building and banned the event that was supposed to go on the rest of the weekend. Now, Germany is a country that, as I'm sure most of you are aware, has actually been involved in 2 genocides. So for those of us from Southern Africa, it's sort of a part of our liberation history, the fact that Germany committed a genocide of the indigenous people of what is today Namibia. And of course, there was the Holocaust. Now, how Germans come to think that it is atoning for the guilt of their genocide to enable the state of Israel to commit a genocide against the Palestinian people is again logic that I haven't fully come to terms with. But the extreme way in which they are doing this. So the first person arrested outside the venue on Friday was a Jewish guy wearing a kippah, holding a poster saying Jew against genocide. So he was arrested. So they're now arresting Jews who are opposed to the genocide of the Palestinians in Germany. And the entire event was a sort of an extraordinary microcosm of how a fascist state, not a democratic state, behaves. And if there is one state in the world that should not behave in a fascist manner, it is the German state. for very obvious historical reasons that I've just outlined. So what has happened in Germany and what is happening in Germany defies any sort of logic. And I should mention that I have a number of degrees in clinical psychology, which was my first training. And you know, this notion of, oh yes, they feel great guilt, this is why they're doing that. You don't assuage your guilt by enabling the commission of another genocide. And finally on this, let me just say, the way in which Germany approaches this question, which is that it assumes that Israel is a state that is representative of all Jews in the world, and that all Jews in the world support what Israel is doing and therefore it must, is profoundly racist and anti-Semitic by definition. And I think we need to add that as an extra layer on the total pathology that we are seeing Germany descend into at the moment.
Thank you. Other questions, comments from the audience? Aaron?
I mean, Andrew, how do we become effective in the UK? Like, even I saw Angela Rayner's comments, even though the opposition were kind of on the fence about BDS legislation, her immediate comment after was, well, of course, the BDS movement itself is anti-Semitic. Yeah. And really and truly, they're not either not informed or deliberately doing it. So how do we tackle that?
Well, yeah, that's the choice. I mean, has Angela Rayner actually managed to atrophy all her brain cells? Because it's so interesting how a few years ago she wasn't saying anything like that at all, and was actually very sympathetic to and supportive of the Palestinian struggle. But now, because it suits her political moment, she simply reversed her opinion. And what it really shows, unfortunately, and I wish I could say it only applied to Angela Rayner, but it applies to probably 98% of our politicians in this country at the moment. They are a bunch of mediocre, mendacious, and corrupt people. And we need to call them out for what they are. Because the fact that we have no senior politician in either of the two major parties in this country actually opposing a genocide that is being committed in real time on our screens actually defies belief. So I think that is more a reflection of the pathetic state of our politics. And I would say to you, what can we do about that? Well, the most important thing to any politician, well, there are two things that are most important to politicians. And I say this to paraphrase what was said in the film, as a recovering politician. Two things most important: votes and money. And unfortunately, money has infused and infected every aspect of British politics, so that, as the American journalist Greg Pallas said about America, we in the United Kingdom can proudly say we have the best democracy that money can buy. And if you want to know why Keir Starmer will not support a ceasefire, has not, as a former human rights lawyer, yet even commented on the fact that the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, in response to South Africa's brilliant submission to the court, has in its interim ruling said that there is a probable risk that Israel is committing genocide. We don't need the court to say that. We see on our screens that Israel is committing genocide. And as someone who has written about and lectured on genocide, I don't need a court to tell me that. But it's actually really good that a court led by an American judge has actually ruled in that way. Our leader of the opposition, who claims to have been a human rights lawyer, has not even commented on that decision, but still refuses to support an unqualified ceasefire. And I'm sure it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he received a donation of £4.5 million, the biggest individual donation in Labour Party history, from a guy called Gary Lubner, who is South African, whose father I knew very well, who was a huge industrialist in South Africa called Bertie Lubner, whose businesses were built on cooperation with the apartheid state. And his son, Gary Lubner, whose only claim to fame is that he's the son of a billionaire and inherited all his father's money, is that there is no criticism of Israel. So he has effectively bought the Labour Party's silence. And that is despicable. So what you can do is you can deprive our politicians at every possible level of the vote if they didn't support a ceasefire at the very earliest opportunity. Well, what I would strongly suggest is, I mean, there are other parties, you know, in some, I mean, the Greens, for instance, have taken quite a good position, I think, on what is happening in Gaza at the moment, which is the issue of our time. If you find there are no candidates that you think are adequate in your particular area, and this applies both to the local and a general election, which will take place sometime this year, then get together as a community and identify an independent candidate who actually represents ordinary people. I mean, Keir Starmer is my MP. He sure as hell doesn't represent me. And there are a large number of people in the constituency who feel likewise, which is why we're fielding an independent candidate against him. So I think that we should take matters into our own hands and actually reflect our disgust with the political status quo in this country. And the reason I don't even mention the Conservatives is because we don't expect any better from them. But literally replacing the person at the dispatch box from the blue tie to the red tie at this point, given who those two people are, is going to make virtually no difference to the lives of ordinary people in this country and is not going to in any way help bring about peace in Palestine.
Quick question for you. Are you still going for the seat in Holborn?
Yeah. I've been endorsed as the independent candidate in Holborn and St Pancras to take on Keir Starmer.
I haven't seen any fundraising for it.
Well, I haven't actually formally announced yet. The only fundraising that's been done is one of the two organizations that endorsed me, an organization called Okisa, which is a sort of a Facebook-based thing. They had a hustings, and when the results of the hustings were announced, they raised £35,000 in 2 days after that. So the only reason I haven't announced formally is because consultations with certain segments of the community continue, and until those are completed, I'm not going to formally announce. But I was in Blackburn over the weekend at a conference of all the independent councillors who are standing. And I think people are going to be shocked in these local elections how many independent candidates actually get elected. And I think people are going to be shocked, especially in the north of the country, at how completely disgusted people are with both of the major parties. And I think our politicians live to such an extent in their own little bubble that they don't realize how ordinary people are thinking at the moment.
Good luck, and I hope you get
See, we get exclusives at West London PLC.
That's why you have to join as members so you can vote for the committee.
Yeah, good.
Just a point of information, really, that there is an independent candidate standing in Ealing North called Sami, and he is a Palestinian. So if anyone here is in the Ealing North constituency, then that's somebody to sort of rally behind.
Is that against James Murray?
Indeed, yes. Keir Starmer's bag carrier.
We've got a couple more minutes. We've got one more hand up here.
Okay, just a quick question. I had the privilege of meeting Abby Schlemm.
Yeah.
And probably I think he's going around saying everyone, but I asked him about it. And I said, so he says there's no place for, this is the end, and there's no place for a settler colonial state in the 21st century. And I pressed him, I said, well, give me how long? And he said, well, he gives it 30 years. What do you think?
Well, first of all, and he's far smarter than me. So, first of all, I think let's take his view as wisdom. South Africa was a settler colonial situation. And apartheid, which didn't start after the Second World War when the neo-Nazis took over our government, it started in 1652 when Europeans arrived in South Africa for the first time. And underpinning that settler colonial regime was extraordinary racist white supremacy. And unfortunately, the other example of settler colonialism in the world, which is the Israeli state, is also underpinned by the most remarkable racist white supremacy, and we're seeing its manifestation in Gaza at the moment. And the only very tiny, and I almost feel bad saying this, but the only very tiny silver lining of the absolutely appalling tragedy that we have witnessed over the past 6 and a bit months is that I think for many people, including many people who are not necessarily, wouldn't describe themselves as political, didn't have strong views about Israel, I think that has changed significantly. And wherever I travel in the world at the moment talking about conflict and genocide, and this is the sense I get. You know, the number of people, first of all, the meetings I attend are so much bigger than they've ever been, both here, but all over the world. I spoke via Zoom the other day at a meeting in South Africa. There were over 3,000 people at the meeting. I mean, it was insane. It was absolutely insane. And I think that for a lot of people, the blinkers have now been removed by the genocidal behavior of the Israeli state. So, you know, please understand that for me, as a white South African living in Britain, where I'm not even a British citizen, I just have indefinite leave to remain, I really don't think it's my place to say what the solution for Palestine should be. I think that that is a question for Palestinians, just as in the case of South Africa, the majority of South Africans needed to determine what our future constitutional settlement was. But, you know, as a human being who has political opinions and has worked politically for many years, I mean, the United States and Britain tried to impose on South Africa what they call a consociational system, which, I mean, I never really figured out what it was, but it was basically a way to try and maintain white privilege through a semblance of democracy. So for me, I've always had the view that the only way for human beings to live together, regardless of their histories, and of course we in South Africa are an example of that, is through creating a one-person, one-vote democratic system. And it's why I can't understand how people describe the phrase "from the river to the sea" as racist if used by Palestinians, although totally acceptable when used by Benjamin Netanyahu, who does seem to use it in fairly genocidal ways. So for me, you know, if I was writing theoretically and academically about this, I would say that from the river to the sea, that part of the world needs to be a democratic unitary state. But again, to end by saying, it's not my place to determine what that future should be. And I certainly have no idea how long it will take. And Avi is in a far better position than me to adjudicate on that. The only thing I would say, and we might have to conclude on this, is that I had to leave South Africa in 1986 because I refused to support, or I refused to serve in the apartheid military. And I'd already been, almost without realizing, recruited into the ANC underground. So I had to get out of the country very quickly and surreptitiously. And the night before I left, I was on a hill overlooking Cape Town. And I thought to myself, I'll never see the city or country of my birth again. I cannot envisage a situation, because we were in the deep depths of apartheid repression at that point. And I just couldn't envisage a political situation where I'd be able to return to my country. But the reality is that 4 years later, our political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela, were released from prison. We started a process of constitutional negotiations. And a further 4 years after that, we became a democracy, with Nelson Mandela elected as our first democratic president. So things that seem intractable, that seem so dark at the moment, can actually change very, very quickly. And I suppose that's what gets me out of bed every morning, is just a sense of hope that the appalling suffering and immiseration that we are seeing every day, hopefully, won't last too much longer, and that we will see profound and systemic change, not just in Palestine and Israel, but in our own countries as well, which are also in desperate need of political and economic renewal.